So please, let's welcome Vijay to the stage. Hi there.
Thank you, Zoe.
Take a seat. Welcome. So as I said, we are all keen to get a return on all the hard work that everyone's putting into AI, and more specifically Gen AI, which everyone's been talking about in the last couple of years. What is it that's in your mind when you're thinking about, the return on investment? What does it mean to you, and what kind of dimensions are you thinking about?
I think on the cost side of the equation of any return on investment, there's a very good understanding of what the costs are. And maybe people have learned from the cloud journey to make sure we capture all the costs well. The tough part is the return part. And, in many cases, the return is a financial return, which is probably a direct benefit on revenue profitability, which are a little more easier to capture. But usually, AI has far-reaching consequences in terms of returns, which is beyond the boundary of an organization. And when you think about situations of drug discovery, as an example, right? The impact of that is just not to the organization. We see, drug discovery has become much more efficient. Organizations that could do 5 new drugs are today able to do 10 new drugs or 12 new drugs a year. So it's definitely from a financial benefit you can capture within the boundary of the organization. But think about what these new drugs are doing in the society or in the markets. It's very hard to capture those benefits. So when you think about returns, the cost side's reasonably easy to capture maybe. The return side or the impact is beyond financial and larger good that you can do, or you can think about metrics on how customer satisfaction is getting better. So those are things that you need to really think about, not just what the organization captures, while that's important.
Sure, so much more beyond dollar signs and
Yes.
thinking actually more broadly than that. That's really helpful. So yeah, focusing on generative AI for a moment then, because that's where a lot of the investment and the focus is on at the moment, and we absolutely shouldn't ignore traditional AI and other forms of it. It's a broad spectrum. Is there anything different to think about in terms of return on investment with respect to generative AI? How are you thinking about that in particular?
So when we think about return on investment, we are thinking about first prioritization.
Yeah.
I think many systems or many organizations are going through a process of figuring out what are the most impactful business cases that they can take. So that entire process of sifting through what is there in the organization and picking the first few, top 5, top 10 are important. That's the first step in making sure your return is coming through. That means you're able to predict that these are the use cases or these are the business cases that are going to most impact my organization. Now then after that is to make sure while you're building those use cases, then you can track what are all your costs, what are all the benefits, some tangible, some non-tangible, intangible benefits, and then go about through the entire process, tracing that through, and then having a way to communicate that back to your stakeholders is the very generic framework, if I can say, of capturing. But with generative AI, I think the costs, like I said earlier, are much more easier to capture. There are technology costs, there are calculators, there are, like you had with cloud ops and FinOps, you have similar such concepts and you can capture. But on the return side, you have to be a lot more diligent with generative AI. And, in many cases, there are productivity improvement and productivity enhancing impacts that generative AI is delivering. Now, what do you do with that productivity generated is also going to have an impact on the returns. So think about just not that we have created more productivity, but what will you do with that enhanced productivity is important as well.
So a question I was going to come on to a bit later is actually around productivity, because in my experience, it gets quite slippery in that, you save time in one process, whoever's involved in that process then decides they can do something else, but often it's quite difficult to capture what that something else is as an additional benefit. Have you solved that issue? What do you do in that kind of case?
Yeah, when you think about productivity, you should not think about just a person's productivity or a particular role or a set of roles.
Yeah.
You should think about the entire organization or entire system that's producing an output. and then focus on where you think the most productivity impact can make a difference. As an example, in a hospital system, I mean, it's intuitive to think about that the productivity of the whole system will improve if you focus on the productivity of the doctors, but that's not necessarily the case. Doctors' productivity has some impact, but the bigger impact is the nurses. Think about where they spend time. They spend time in doing handoffs, right? When they shifts, they hand off they take over and then they hand off. Yeah. And that is like almost 30 to 20%, 25% of time spent in that process. If you can make that efficient, generative AI can do a lot in that space in terms of EMRs, automatically getting all the data in so that the handoff process can be smooth. And that just increases the entire efficiency of the system, right? You go to a surgery, you probably go through the surgery, the doctor spends maybe 4 or 5 hours or 6 hours. Your recovery time is in days, and most of the time is the nurses giving you the care. So if you can get nursing productivity up, then you can get system productivity up. So that's an example. Another example we think about is with co-pilots, right? We have a lot of code assists. They are just improving your coding ability. But when you have to deliver a project, it is just not about the coding ability that improves the entire project delivery. It's the entire system that you look at, right from what it takes to get your requirements to deployment, and get the productivity of that entire system and look at what is the bottleneck. You do the value stream mapping and focus on areas that you can improve productivity. Coding is definitely one. Like we have tools that can tell you if you have 1,000 or 10,000 set of regression test cases, how in those regression test cases can I get the time down? If I'm just changing a few things and retesting, it can tell you, look, don't retest these 1,000 test cases, but choose these 37 that are the most impactful ones.
Right.
So you have to think about the entire system and debottleneck where productivity enhancements can improve the entire system efficiency, but not just look at point solutions.
That's really interesting because often it is easy to decompose a problem or a system or a process, and of course then potentially you're losing some of those gains.
Yes.
If you're not careful, you don't reconsider that whole system. Can you share any more examples of from your own team, your own experience where AI has been used to drive value, as you said, maybe not just the dollars, but the societal value as well?
Yes. We have done at least 3-4 different situations where we have impacted, especially in the healthcare, right? I'd like to ask a question. What is the value of knowing that a person is going to have a heart attack 15 days before they actually have it? How will you place a value on that?
Difficult, right?
Very difficult, right? Of course, you can mathematically model what is a life, maybe $7 million. That is some experiential data that we have. However, if you think about how to get that done, it is not just a particular actor that can do. You need the medical expertise that needs to come.
Absolutely.
You need to be able to actually then test through and go through clinical trials of something you develop. You need the tech that can predict, right? You need to be able to then see all the past data. So it requires collaboration between a technology provider, a hyperscaler of some sort, a SI of some sort like HCLTech could be one. And then you need a medical university or a research center. And then you go about building. This is a multi-year effort, right? So this one is definitely you can capture all the costs, but this is going to have a bigger benefit to a lot more people than just a small hospital or a particular healthcare system. So I think this is an example of how, if you can predict heart failures or situations like that 15 days in advance, or ability to do that, it has a lot bigger benefit. I'll give you another example, especially during COVID. We built a system for a medical devices company that can administer shocks remotely, right? So it does two things. First of all, people who need this are people who have diseases like Parkinson's, and they are not mobile, right? It saves them a trip maybe 2 hours, 2.5 hours. Most important is once they get this device implanted, then remotely you can administer shocks, and there is no solution really. Once you have these diseases, you can just reduce the pain and have better quality of life. So that administration of the shock remotely is invaluable to the patient. It saves them a lot of time. And think about it for the clinicians who do this. For them, usually you need a patient to come, you get a lot of data, then figure out how much more you have to administer later. But now you have a generative AI system telling you what is the level of shock that you have to administer, and that can be done centrally. So what used to take an hour for a clinician to do this is now under 20 minutes. So it's improved clinician productivity. It saved time for patients who don't need to make those trips. And third, today you have coverage. Because this expertise for neuro modulation, this is called, to be doing this is very specialized. It's not available. Today, these devices are there in 20 different countries, over 40,000 people using this. So a benefit of this is just not to the company that we made this device. Of course, it's created a market for them, but what is the value of that to a patient? What is the value of that to the doctor, or the hospital ecosystem that's using it? So I think it's a lot more comprehensive. So these are examples of value that these systems have delivered, not just to the immediate organization, but larger ecosystem as well.
So that's really interesting. So in the course of some of these projects, there are surely some trade-offs to be made when we're thinking about the return on investment, right? You do have the cost-benefit analysis to do, and it might be that there's a lot of upfront costs, but there's a lot of value down the line. Can you talk us through how you think about that, how you bring people with you to appreciate that, okay, upfront cost now, but actually more value later? Or, are there other trade-offs that you've been seeing in the course of your work?
So ROI and payback are very common ways to look at some of these programs. And like I said, everything is not value captured. The trade-off is between, do you prioritize a financial return?
Yeah.
Do you prioritize being early to the market? Do you prioritize capturing or creating a new value segment? For example, you and I can, or most of us here, are consumers, right? We can take pictures with phones, we can take pictures with cameras, and it doesn't require a lot of expertise. But you look around, we have professional photographers here, and they have a lot of sophistication and knowledge. They can use complex devices. Why do I say that? Now you have two different segments, but this customer of ours said, look, I need something which can give the professional capability to a consumer. Right? They created a new segment called a prosumer segment. And this prosumer segment happened because they studied all of the professional use cases and users, automated all of that, and then did ML on top of it in the first case, then put AI on top of it, and created cameras that can have AI in them. And then it's easy. You can just focus on something and everything adjusts, or you can select a few things. So you can get professional level pictures from a device or a camera that requires less sophistication to use. So now this company suddenly has created a market segment. They were the first mover into this market. So they captured quite a bit of value. So the trade-off there was, okay, we have to get a product going first. So they had some basic machine learning algorithms running on the edge device, and later on innovated further and did AI on top of it and did a lot more things.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you. I'm going to come out to the audience for some questions if anyone's got one. So get thinking. I've got one last question for Vijay now. So do let me know if you've got a question for him. Obviously, aside from the technology, it takes a lot more to be successful with AI adoption and having AI actually have a really good positive impact. What are the other critical success factors that you look for most when you're embarking on an AI project?
I think taking the organization along with you is very important. Managing the change, because all of this has impact on people, right? Taking the people along, making sure you're focused on the benefits that you want to deliver as you run through these programs in an organization is non-trivial. And I think those are more important than maybe the technology itself. That the technology can make things happen, but the change management, educating people, taking people along is more important, I believe.
Brilliant, brilliant. I completely agree. So thank you very much. Any questions from the audience? We've got one at the front I can see. Do we have a mic, please? Thank you. One is coming. Thank you so much.
Hi, I'm Jan and working in fashion industry. And how would you calculate the impact of a project if the success of the project is uncertain?
Yes. So there are multiple ways, and thank you for the question. First of all, the return on investment is not a one number. I think it's a range of possibilities, right? And there is some expected value, right, which probabilistically you can determine, but it's a range. The moment we think about return being in a range, I think that expands what you can do or not do. But that also helps manage expectations on what a project or a program can do. And as long as you're in that range, you're reasonably okay. And that has to be actively managed. So I think return on investment is not a one number. Most organizations have a range of some sort, high, medium, low, whatever, right? But you have to manage it not as a deterministic value, but as a probabilistic value in a range. Thank you.
Any other questions? I don't know if you've got a better view than me. While people are thinking, I was going to ask about prioritization, because you mentioned that near the start. And quite often, and particularly as generative AI is such a general purpose technology, many areas of AI are, but because it's so general purpose, there are so many opportunities. And so you often have, dozens of different opportunities and use cases. Can you say a bit more about how you conduct the prioritization? Again, what is it you're looking for when you're making those decisions about what to take forward?
I think it's not a linear process. It's a little bit iterative in nature. And we think about it like an MVP process, if you think about, right? First, prioritize. I mean, you can use any of the metrics that we have in terms of saying, okay, these are the range of possibilities on returns, and then say, I want to pick the top 3, or I want to pick the ones with low risk, whichever, right? Once you start, then you get them from just an idea phase, once it's evaluated, to an MVP of some sort, and then make sure what range of possibilities is there, and then get it into production, and then post-production, monitor it for performance. So I think, and sometimes when you do the MVP, it's not once, you probably have to iterate it twice or thrice before you get it right.
And just a kind of a cheeky last question, in your experience, is it best to, when you're kind of selecting the MVPs to go forward with, is it best to take a small number of low-risk ones, or is it better to take a portfolio approach, one low risk, one medium, and a couple that are much higher?
It's a function of how risk-taking the organization is, I would think, largely. But I would take a portfolio or approach to it, and I think go with it rather than take low risk.
Just the low-hanging fruit. That's a temptation to go for that. Thank you.
I think you should take a balanced portfolio approach.
Brilliant. Potential for higher return. Last call for questions. Okay, I don't see any. Well, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks
for the conversation,
for your time.
Vijay.
Thanks for the conversation.
Brilliant. Okay, so I'm just been told that we've now come to a natural break point. Our next speaker's not here. So what I took from the discussion, we've had loads of great insight today from the different speakers, lots of different ways you can engage people more effectively to think through the cost and benefit and the value of these projects. It goes beyond the dollar value. We need to be thinking about short-term and long-term, or the trade-offs in between. So thank you all so much for listening in to this track. I hope you found it useful. I hope you've heard some great examples that get you thinking about what you can do in your own organizations. But enjoy the break that's coming up. And everything is back in the main stage for the next part of this afternoon. So thank you very much.